A detailed annual review with the public sector banks and their chiefs. Again, there was a free interactive session with the Secretary, Department of Financial Services, Debashish Panda, being with me. He also was accompanied by Pankaj Jain and also Amit Agarwal, additional secretaries from the ministry. There again, there was a detailed discussion. Each of the banks together have given me through the IBA presentation on where all of their performances. In fact, after that we had a detailed interactive session where both Debashish and myself have very clearly laid out the picture of the government's various schemes which are going on, particularly after the second wave, and also sort of reviewing what was announced through the Atmanirbhar Bharat, several announcements, how the banks have taken it all forward, and now post the second wave, the announcements which have been made, we would like the banks also to have their role to take it forward to the sections for whom they are designed and aimed at. Over and above that, clearly I've requested the banks to have at various regional levels interaction with export promotion agencies, with the chambers of commerce and industry, so that the requirement of exporters can all be timely, well addressed, and between public sector banks there should be some kind of a simple but yet a uniform approach, so that exporters are not made to run between one bank and another, scouting to see where the offer is better. So public sector banks have all been requested to have that interaction, not just with the export-oriented industries, but also with their chambers and with their Federation of Indian Exporters Organization, the FIO. Other than that, both Debashish Panda and myself have highlighted the fact that today's nature of banking is also changing. We see even from industry inputs that people are able to raise finances even outside of the banking system. Several decades post-independence, India has depended only through the banks, funds which businesses would want to have. Now industry themselves recognize that they have avenues outside of the banks, in that they are able to go to the market and raise enough revenues. Even our banks themselves have raised revenues from the markets. So there was a bit of a discussion on those avenues also to be understood by the banks, and focus on how they can extend credit to wherever it is required. In that, we have also, just as we placed emphasis on the export-oriented industries, we've underlined the fact that Prime Minister has been emphasizing all over the country that there should be by district an identification of such goods which can be found to have great export potential. And that is why you had this one district, one product. In Uttar Pradesh, only a few days ago I had gone, and both the SIDBI and the Exim Bank were with me to carry that forward in the name of Ubarte Sitare, where you identify champions within that particular chosen sector and help them to do everything it takes for exporting the products. In that, credit will be given, assistance will be provided for technology infusion, and also hand holding will happen for export of products. So I've requested all the banks all over the country to work with state governments and ensure that by district, that one district, one product also gets benefit from the banks. SIDBI and Exim Bank together are also helping in providing cluster facilitation for such things, and also providing common infrastructure which will be required by these export potential manufacturers who are largely in small and medium areas, but for them to have a common infrastructure within that district as is required by that product manufacturer, banks can also play a role. We have highlighted that. Other than that, I have, from the inputs that I have received from the industry, from the input I have received from the direct taxation and indirect taxation field formations, we understand that a lot of sunrise sectors require a lot of banking assistance. And identifying these sunrise sectors, I've asked the banks to extend themselves to understand what will be their financial requirement and try facilitating them. Fintech is one of the areas in which banks are doing quite a lot of work. I've highlighted to them that there are two aspects. One, of course, for the banks themselves to have the benefit of technology being used, and another, fintech as a sector itself also requires a lot of assistance. I've asked banks to please look at that area as well and approach through various other information systems that they may have such people who are already furthering their businesses, but that is one of the ways in which we can provide greater stimulus. And lastly, about the banks, I've also requested banks to come up with specific plans for the Northeast so that businesses and requirements of the Northeast states, not one plan for all the 8 states, but to each according to their requirement, so that the logistics in the Northeast, so that exports from the Northeast, Prime Minister has emphasized again for the organic fruits and vegetables and the products which come out of the Northeast which can find markets all over, for the banks also to make sure that that will happen. There is again a matter of concern which banks themselves have recognized, that in the eastern states, be it Orissa, be it Bihar, be it Jharkhand, and somewhat even for that matter West Bengal, where CASA deposits are actually piling up. And banks should now, as much as possible, also give that facility in that region for greater credit expansion. It's one thing to receive deposits, smaller, medium-sized deposits from that region, from the people who are living in that region, but to have a plan which is so desperately needed so that credit flow for business development in those regions can also be better promoted. So, whilst the situation in the western and southern regions of the country, CASA is there, credit requirement is also there, so you are able to utilize that, earn better, and also give in better terms for the credit requirement, but that's not so much happening in the eastern and particularly the several states of eastern region. So these were elaborately discussed. I also repeat something which was said earlier. Collectively, public sector banks have all done well. They've come out of the PCA. Today they are able to show clear profits, and individually too several banks have done very well. They've also shown that they are now in a position to go to the market and raise monies for their growth capital requirements. So today you find the Indian public sector banks, even though they were going through the pandemic, even though they were extending all facilities for all the DBT beneficiaries and so on, through the Bank Mitra, and that is one thing on which I have repeatedly given credit to the banks for having undertaken these kind of work during the pandemic. The amalgamation work which happened just prior to the pandemic have not suffered because their attention has gone to serving during the pandemic. They have completed the process. Today all banks are sufficiently endowed, and the processes of amalgamation has not let any customer to suffer. Seamlessly the amalgamations have all happened, and most of the banks are comfortably reporting on the amalgamation related information. So we also launched the EASE, which is the Easy Access and Service Excellence, which was launched after 2015 when Prime Minister had addressed the banks through, what was that called? Gyan Sangam. In 2015, when Prime Minister addressed through the Gyan Sangam all the banks and also spoke about details about how professional they should become, how they can improve on their service experience for the customers and so on. Since then, without any gap, EASE has been launched 1.0, then 2.0, 3.0, and for each one of them a report has been given about how the outcomes are. Banks have improved the customer experiences. Today we launched EASE 4.0. Even that has been achieved by the banks. So I'm glad. There is one announcement which I would want Debashish to himself say, which pertain to the benefits, pensionary benefits and so on. Debashish.
This is in continuation of the 11th bipartite settlement which was signed by the IBA with the unions on 11/11/2020 on wage revision. So from it there was a proposal for enhancement in the family pension and also the employer's contribution under the national pension scheme. So this has also been approved by the Honorable Finance Minister, and the benefits would now accrue to the family pensioner. Earlier, the scheme had slabs of 15, 20 and 30% of the pay that the pensioner drew at that point of time, and it was capped subject to a maximum of 9,284 rupees. So that was a very paltry sum, and Madam Finance Minister was very much concerned and wanted that this should be revised so that they get a decent amount to survive and sustain. So now the cap has been completely removed, and a uniform slab of 30% of the pay that the employee was receiving will be entitled to them as the family pension. So it could go up to as high as 35,000 rupees per family. So that is the first one. The second change that has been brought about is that the employer was contributing 10% by way of contribution to the NPS corpus. 10% was coming from the employee and 10% was being given by the employer. Now this 10% of the employer has been enhanced to 14%, which means a 40% rise in the pension contribution from the banks for the employees. So these are two very significant changes that have been made, and the Government of India, Finance Minister has already approved this, and these benefits would be available to these employees with this change. Thank you.
So I'll add one more bit about the meetings that I've had with the CBDT and with the CBIC and the field formations from the Mumbai region. I was immensely grateful to the customs that during the corona pandemic, they had, without taking any rest, seamlessly moved goods which were coming in to meet the requirements of the hospitals and also the importers. And on that, the customs worked tirelessly, and I put on record, which I did before them as well, my appreciation for the way in which customs had worked 24/7, and we hadn't had any complaints coming from anyone saying no, customs is sitting over our goods which have been imported and so on. So customs, I did mention that particularly I'm very thankful. Similarly, the GST officials, you'll all recollect that in the last several months the collection has been kept up, the momentum has been maintained. We've all through maintained on an average over 1 lakh rupees collection per month. And that couldn't have been possible unless the GST officials had, worked very hard, and they did, and therefore there was a word of praise for that. And the new normal, as would the Revenue Secretary would say, will probably be in the range of 1,10,000 per month on an average, and the officers were quite enthused, and I'm grateful for that. The CBDT as well has been working very hard, and the direct taxation collection, more importantly both the GST and the direct taxation, have plugged a lot of loopholes, as a result of which the collections have improved, the GST particularly. Several instances of gaming the system have all been identified by using the technology available to them. In both the cases, and as is also in the case of the banks, there was a great sense of feeling sad, and condolence was expressed by all of us for all those staff members who have been affected, families who have lost their breadwinner in many cases. Our colleagues who were affected have all succumbed to the COVID, and even that was one of the things on which all of us have expressed deep condolences, and among ourselves made sure that the pensionary and other benefits which have to reach these people and their families will be, and as it is, several of them have already got it, but we shall be looking into helping them so that none of the families have to run from pillar to post, and we shall facilitate that. These are my opening remarks. If anything is to be added at this stage by you, Tarun.